Why is everything dark?
Did I forget to pay the electric bill again?
My fault. Spilled a soda on my PC and it cut the current to the building.
Fix it then!
Found the main power switch.
Why in the Emperor do we look different?
Copyright reasons.
What?
I'll make it short. We talked with Flork of Chaos, that owns the designs for the Florks we used, and he suggested us to retain our own artistic freedom and to be able to monetize videos, merch and such freely, to make our own designs going forward. And here we are.
To use his designs we would have had to pay him for the license. Did he give a suggestion that went against his own interests?
He did. I like Flork a lot. He's a good guy.
If only he was a good guy enough to break me out of my 40k lore-imbued prison created by the golden Italian here.
And with that you just renounced to electricity for 2 weeks in the basement. One unbreakable shield against the coming darkness. One last blade, forged in defiance of fate. Let them be my legacy to the galaxy I conquered, and my final gift to the species I failed. And today we will cause controversy and mayhem once again, Pio. Are you ready?
It feels weird having an egg for the first time, but yes, I am ready.
Also, how did the invasion of Venezuela go in the end?
We lost for now, but the revolution will never die.
Good thing you are in good spirit, because today we need to talk about a very delicate topic.
How delicate?
We will show everyone, through lore and proof provided by various sources, that in fact in 40k a faction of good guys exist, and they are none other than the Imperium of Men itself.
Does that include Erebus?
I mean, fuck Erebus, but he did kill Erda in the end, so he did also good things. Also, just before we start, know that we have opened a Patreon where you can support the channel and get exclusive perks. Together with Patreon, we opened a slew of other socials, like a Discord server made specifically for the YouTube community, so if you want to support the channel or even speak and meet us on Discord, check the description and all links there. Getting to the topic of the video now, I want to make something very clear from the beginning. Because if there is something I have experience in, is people not watching the videos on the channel but frothing in anger from their mouths in the comments anyway. You should see the mess that the comment section of my video on why female custodians can't exist has become. And I want to make it clear that 2 points of views exist to categorize factions and the Imperium in 40k. There is the point of view of looking at the universe from the outside, with the knowledge and morals we have in our own world, from which everyone appears extremely evil, and morality at best questionable and grey. And then there is the point of view of looking at the factions and events of 40k from inside the universe, and from the point of view of the people living in it and having to survive in it. It is this second point of view that we will cover in the video, because while in the first it is clear that everyone in 40k is different shades of evil for various reasons, in the second case things are a lot more complicated than that. And I want to divide this video in sections, just to answer every single question and critique that can be made about the Imperium and the things that for people make the Imperium of Men evil in the first place. And let's start probably from the easiest claim to debunk the idea that the Imperium is evil just for the sake of being evil. And let's answer, for once, with context, why the Imperium is so against technological advancements, but most especially, why the Imperium of Men is extremely hateful of anything alien. To answer this question, we have to start our explanation from the Dark Age of Technology. For those too new to 40k to know what the Dark Age of Technology exactly is, it is a period of time that spanned from the 15th millennium to the 25th millennium. It was pretty much a period of time that lasted 10,000 years. I will not explain too much about this age, but I need to give context to make people understand what really created the hatred we now see in 40k for different things. The Dark Age of Technology is regarded as the zenith of humanity. It was an age of wonders and technology so advanced we ourselves would call it magic if we had the chance to see it in action. It is during this period that the navigators that now serve in 40k to traverse the warp were genetically engineered. It is also in this age that many of the technologies and war gear we see in 40k come from. One of the most important things coming from the Dark Age of Technology are warp engines and warp travel. It was the humans of this age that discovered that they could travel the warp to achieve faster than light travel around the galaxy, and fashioned technologies like the Geller fields to protect themselves, but this humanity grew quickly arrogant of its superiority. During the Dark Age of technology, humanity was the most powerful species in the galaxy. Our technology and weaponry were unrivaled. Xenos, were encountered, were scared of us, especially after we fashioned AI. And this was the downfall of the Dark Age of technology. Now, I will probably expand on this topic in its own video, but I have a theory as to why all of the events I'm going to explain happened, and why humanity was betrayed by its own creations. Humans of this period acknowledged the superiority of the so-called Men of Iron in warfare. They pretty much created weapons that would put Exterminatus weaponry of 40k to shame. Naval cannons that could shoot black holes, gravity wells powerful enough to tear away a continent from a planet and then use it as a meteor against it. Swarms of nanobots that could eat all biological life on a planet, which is, by the way, theorized to be what virus bombs are. And then, in all of its arrogance, humans gave almost total control of its weapons to their legions of battle robots controlled by artificial intelligence. As it can be imagined, they spelled disaster from a mile away.
They pulled a Skynet.
They pulled a galaxy-level Skynet. The Men of Iron and all the weapons and constructs they controlled turned against their creators, humans, and a galactic war erupted known as the Cybernetic Revolt. That saw humanity and a coalition of alien powers having to go to war against armies of robots created for nothing more than war. The war was brutal, and went on its theorized for centuries, but in the end, the coalition of alien powers and humanity won the war, and the Men of Iron were almost annihilated. From that point, AI became outlawed. Now, this is important because you have to keep in mind that humanity had given many of its most technological advanced instruments to the Men of Iron. This means that humanity itself was pulled back millennia in technological advancement in one single war. But this was not enough to bring down what was known as the Human Federation. They were on their knees, pretty much, but not yet totally defeated. As usual, it is not a single catastrophe that brings down a powerful empire, it's several in rapid succession. At that same time, psychers and mutants have started appearing around the territory of humanity. Now, I don't take as a given that everyone here is an expert of 40k, so I will say it clearly. Psychers are dangerous, extremely, especially if unsanctioned and untrained. Entire planets were invaded by legions of demons because they accepted the Psychers within their midst without any kind of security measures. This means, funnily enough, that the planets that fared better were the most superstitious ones, that practiced pretty much witch hunts to find and kill every Psyker that emerged. As humanity was dealing with this, and with the continuously escalating threat the mutants posed, some of them started becoming increasingly aggressive and hostile, warp storms started raging around the galaxy, caused by none other than the extreme number of Eldars present in the Milky Way galaxy, and the beginning of the birth of the Chaos God Slanesh. Warp travel became increasingly dangerous, until it became all but impossible. This left many colonies of humanity isolated and alone. And it was at this point that, sensing humanity's weakness, the same aliens that humanity had considered allies and even friends at one point, decided to betray the human race. Humanity became the target of several alien races that wanted to either enslave it or wipe it out entirely. All of this while human colonies were still battling demons and mutant infestations. The Human Federation fell, and with it, all colonies were left alone and without help. Almost all colonies humanity had established suffered regression on some levels, especially technological. Some colonies weren't even able to grow their own food, so this caused for them giant famines. Colonies of humans would start battling one another for the meager resources and remnants of technology they could acquire, and this brought devastation on many planets, including Earth. That would become pretty much a wasteland battled over by techno-barbarian warlords. And if you don't believe how bad things became, I gathered some info directly from 40k codexes to make you understand how dire of a time it was.
There is no end to the abomination of the alien. Do not allow any guise of sentience to stay your hand. There can be no hesitation when the survival of humanity as a species is at stake. One of the first terrible truths humans discovered when they ventured beyond Terra and into the stars is that they were not alone. Wherever mankind went, it encountered the alien. Some civilizations were long dead, having fallen to self-destructive hubris, natural disasters, internecine wars, or external predations. Others, though, were very much alive, and myths from the Dark Age of Technology speak of the terrifying first encounter with alien races. As humanity resurged into the galaxy in the 30th millennium, the Emperor led his armies across the galaxy to reconquer the stars against the alien, perhaps the first and greatest danger to the nascent Imperium. Endless blood and ichor were shed in eradicating species after species. The Dark Age of Technology exists only in myth in modern times, and the causes of its ending are poorly understood. Many cultures share similar stories of a breakdown of the Golden Age, of entire regions becoming isolated by raging warp storms and turning against themselves in crippling wars. Others tell of a time of apotheosis for mankind, when mutations and psychic powers became increasingly prevalent, and predatory beings from warp space used such open conduits to feast on the living. Worshippers of the ruinous powers maintain that these times were the triumph of chaos, when mankind's first fumbling attempts to rule over the mortal realm were cast down into anarchy by cackling demons from the warp. Whatever the cause, the Dark Age of Technology gave way to the Age of Strife. The patchwork remnants of human civilization fought against each other, as well as the hordes of aliens now swarming in to sack the worlds. Many human civilizations were enslaved or completely wiped out. Others reverted to barbarism as order crumbled. Only worlds where the rising tide of psyches was rigorously repressed evaded the plummet into nightmare and madness. Earth itself became completely isolated by warp storms for several thousand years, collapsing into a state of total anarchy, with savage gangs of tech pirates roving the ruins of its ravaged continents. As humanity grappled with threats from within, opportunistic Xenos races gazed upon the crumbling realm with hungry eyes. Alien invaders emerged from the stars and descended upon isolated human settlements, butchering and enslaving the colonists to expand their own galactic empires. In the thousands of years that were the Age of Strife, human attitudes towards Xenos races hardened to the point of utter hatred. No longer were they seen as potential allies or sources of trade and science. Instead, they were to be feared, reviled, and, should the opportunity arise, annihilated without remorse or hesitation.
Humans were the first ones to seek peace with anything alien inhabiting the galaxy. The hatred every human is taught to have for anything alien is not something born from superstition. It is something born from past experiences, where humanity extended an hand in peace, only to be stabbed in the back the moment they weren't strong enough to fight back. AIs and technology became feared because they almost annihilated our species, and the same goes for the aliens. The Age of Strife, as it would become known as, ended around M30, with the birth of the Chaos God Slanesh, and the almost total annihilation of the Eldar race. It is at this point that the Emperor would emerge, having lived through all of the events I explained, as the Emperor by this time was almost 40,000 years old. And because I know that there will be people that still don't believe me, let's examine all the major alien species the galaxy has, and the arguments that people use to try and claim that they are the good guys instead of humanity.
I see extreme levels of xenophobia in the next minutes. I approve all of it.
The Orc race. The Orks, by themselves, might seem harmless, almost comical in some ways for their language or actions, as the Orks are more an instinct-driven race than one that tries to better itself mentally or ideologically. The Orks, by themselves, are a devolution of a superior species called the Krorks. Superior in everything to the Orks, from thinking to the technology they used. The Krorks in origin having even superior technology than the Imperium of Men of the Great Crusade. That was the highest point of strength the Imperium would ever reach after the fall of the Human Federation of the Dark Age of Technology. The Krorks, and by definition the Orks, are a race bioengineered for warfare created by the Old Ones. The race that seeded life in the Milky Way galaxy, and that created the Krorks to fight in a war known as the War in Heaven. A war that happened 60 million years before the events of 40k, and a war so big that even the biggest wars of the Imperium of Men are just a blip on the radar compared to it. The Orks are engineered to fight and move war. It is in their DNA, and it is what they were made to do. They reproduce really fast, and when they die, they release spores on the place they die on. The spores will find a good place to create fungi, and those fungi will become more orcs. Consider that every orc is substantially bigger and stronger than a normal human, but they are not than a marine. At least most of them aren't, as they get bigger and stronger the older they become. The problem with the Orks is that they are an infestation. They can never be cleared for good from a place they infest. The only solution is usually exterminatus, extinguishing all life on a planet by destroying its biosphere. And even then, you can't be sure they are all gone, as Ork infestation have been detected even in the territory of the Eye of Terror, and the warp itself. The main problem with the Orks is numbers. Space Marines are still superior to them, but when you have thousands of Marines against millions or even billions of Orks, the odds are not in your favor. Many examples can be seen of this, the biggest one being the War for Ullanor of the Great Crusade, where the Orks managed to bog down and almost kill multiple legions and their Primarchs for how many and how strong they were, with the Emperor and his custodians having to intervene directly to slay the war boss of Ullanor and send the Orks in disarray, just to have a chance to beat them. Now, people usually use as a justification that the Orks are simply engineered for war. Fighting and killing is all they know how to do, and they don't do it with malignity. But this couldn't be further from the truth, even while being true at the same time. There is different examples of the Orks using humans as cattle to eat or slaves. Even a fan favorite chapter, known as the Lamenters, was a witness of this.
My boys!
The Lamenters had to deal with this reality when they were trying to save human slaves that were being used as miners by the Orks. We are talking of millions of human slaves that they freed, but they had no option to evacuate them from the mines before the Orks would attack in force and annihilate all of them. They wanted to stay on the planet and fight until the end side by side with the slaves, that had to beg them to go away and save themselves. The Lamenters in the end were convinced. They saved the slaves they could and evacuated. And after they did, with the permission of the slaves on the ground, bombed the planet to hell to make them die as free men, by their request. They were offered an iron halo as a gift by Lord Calgar of the Ultramarines, a big honor, as a reward for beating the Orks. The Lamenters refused it, as they saw nothing honorable in their actions, as for their own view, they had failed the people they wanted to save. And because I want to hammer home how brutal the Orks are, I will now show you an excerpt from the book Rynn's World, where the Crimson Fist were fighting an Ork wag that had invaded their planet. I hope you are not too impressionable.
Cortez turned his attention back to the fate of Aldrin, the woman and her children. The Ork boss had reached out its right hand, gripped Aldrin by the head and lifted him into the air. With the man dangling, his arms flailing uselessly at the Ork's arm, his legs kicking and flailing, the Ork boss turned towards the fire and began walking, a deep, throaty chuckle emerging from its throat as it did so. The woman's screams took on fresh urgency now. "Throne, no!" she wailed. "Aldrin!" To her children she yelled, "Close your eyes, my babies. Close your eyes and don't listen." Cortez tightened his grip on his bolt pistol. The fingers of his power fist flexed and clenched hard. They could have crushed steel. "Damn it!" he muttered. "Hurry up!" But he knew his Space Marines would not be in place in time to save Aldrin, and if he moved prematurely, he would jeopardize the first part of his plan. There was nothing he could do. The Ork boss reached the edge of the blaze now and bellowed something to its fellows. Cortez scowled at the sound of the Ork language. It was as ugly as the beasts were themselves. Whatever the creature said, a fresh round of hooting and laughing began, which seemed to satisfy the Ork boss. It stretched out its arm and held Aldrin out over the fire. Yellow flames licked his legs greedily, the air filled with the skin-crawling sound of agonized, high-pitched screams. "Where are you?" Cortez demanded of his fists, speaking through gritted teeth. "Why aren't you in position?" It was Brother Benizar that replied, "We are at the vehicles, my lord. We're cutting their fuel lines now." "Work faster!" Cortez snapped back. The flesh of Aldrin's legs was blistering. He kicked and screamed for all he was worth, but he was helpless against the strength of the Ork boss. Soon the flesh had turned black, and the flames crept higher, moving towards his torso. The Orks were still enjoying the show. The woman had turned away. She was holding the heads of her children down so they couldn't watch the final, torturous moment of their father's life. "Done!" reported Benizar over the link. "The bikes aren't going anywhere." "Get into firing positions, now!" Cortez barked. "It's time!" So saying, he stepped out from the shadow of the silos into full view of the enemy. He raised his bolt pistol, knocked the safety off and braced it on the back of his power fist, almost as if he were about to take a competition shot in some tournament. He lined his sights up on the Ork boss, zeroing in on its oversized skull. The Orks still hadn't noticed him. They were too wrapped up in the torment of the human. Cortez took a deep breath. With a single thought, he activated the vox amp set into his helmet. His voice boomed like thunder, drowning out the last of Aldrin's screams.
So yes, repeat to me again how there is no malice in the nature of the Orks, and tell me once again how they are the good guys because they were engineered to move war. Now, let's move to the Eldars. Their species is probably the biggest problem humanity has ever had before the Tyranids showed up. The Eldari, or better known as the Eldars, are a dying species in the wider galaxy. They reached their apex before and during the Age of Strife, as the Eldar species was the dominant species of the entire galaxy, with trillions of Eldars roaming around undisturbed, and all of them pretty much immortal, as when they died, their souls could be called back from the warp and they could be reborn in a new body once again. Their fall came when, becoming more and more hedonistic and violent, and I'm talking entire planet level slaughters level of violence just to feel something, as they had become desensitized to all pleasures of life from indulging in them constantly and for millennia on end, as Eldars are pretty much immune to aging. With their combined psychic might, as every Eldar was a powerful psyker in his own right, they ended up birthing the fourth god of chaos, born from their actions and emotions. They are the reason Slaanesh came to be. Their slaughters and indulging in extremes having created enough negative emotions in the warp to cause the birth of a new chaos god, that when born devoured their home planets and the majority of the Eldar race it found in the position it was born in. In fact, before it was stupidly retconned to be just a hole in reality created by the war in heaven, the Eye of Terror was a scar left in reality because it is where Slaanesh was born, and where the home planet of the Eldar was situated. Which, if you ask me, it is still canon lore, because the lore of Soulstones of the Eldars was never corrected, and they can be harvested only in the planets that remained near the Eye of Terror, so it is still canon if you ask me that Slaanesh was born there. When Slaanesh was born, she devoured the majority of the Eldar race, and the Eldars that now die can't be reborn anymore, as Slaanesh eats their souls in the warp. They are damned to hell and to become nothingness because of their actions. If it wasn't for Soulstones, that the Eldar place everywhere from their weapons to armors to catch their souls when they die, so they don't vanish into the warp, every Eldar that dies will be gone forever. When the Eldar race fell, the Eldars split into 4 factions. The Harlequin Eldars, that we will not talk about because they are very few and are pretty much murder clown assassins. The Exodites, which same thing and are probably the only truly good Eldars of the galaxy, as they decided to leave their society of hedonism and seek of pleasure behind to become one with nature, and live in their paradise planets in peace and coexisting with the nature around them.
Go find a job, hippies.
And then we have the majority of the Eldars left. The Craftworld Eldars, called simply Eldari, and the Dark Eldars, called simply the Drukhari. Craftworld Eldars are pretty much refugees that saw that something was going to happen to their societies, so they built planet-sized spaceships called Craftworlds. They are artificial ships, often the size of moons or small planets, and used them to flee the center of the Eldar Dominion before the birth of Slaanesh, so they weren't in range to be consumed when it happened. They are Eldars that practice moderation in everything, even in their own psychic potential, using psychic power sparingly and only if needed. They are just remnants though, and there isn't many, and as Eldars have problems reproducing after the birth of Slaanesh, their dream is to rebuild the Eldari race and their empire to their former glory. Keep in mind though that they are willing to do it at the expense of every other species, in fact seeing themselves as the peak of all organic life, considering all others inferior, especially humans that they see as primates and barbaric, calling them with the moniker in their language of Monkai, which seems to be a word taken from monkey, and it is what they use to describe humans. Alliances with them were possible here and there between humans and Craftworld Eldars when their objectives aligned, but most commonly they are found fighting each other, as many Eldars end up becoming pirates that roam the galaxy. The most recent alliance is between the faction of the Eldars known as the Ynnari, under their great priestess Rynn, and the wider Imperium, and Primarch Roboute Guilliman, as she helped bring Guilliman back after the fall of Cadia and restore him to life to fight once again. But even now, both sides look at each other with suspicion and mistrust, ready to attack the other at the first sign of betrayal of any kind. And lastly, we have the last remnants of the Eldar race that is left from the majority of the Eldars that were there when the Empire fell, the Drukhari. or the Dark Eldars. The Dark Eldars are the most vile of the sub-factions of the Eldars. They are the true remnants of the Eldar Empire, and have not changed their ways even after the fall. Having found refuge in the Webway after the annihilation of their own worlds, a pocket dimension created by the Old Ones and used by the Eldars for faster-than-light travel instead of the warp, the Dark Eldars built a new domain here in the city and territory of Komorrah. The Dark Eldars have lost all of their psychic powers and might, now relying on their abilities and technology for just one thing: pleasure. They have built gladiatorial pits where they put the members of other species they kidnapped to fight one another for entertainment. And when they are not doing that, they are kidnapping entire planetary populations and assaulting and slaughtering entire planets of humans and xenos alike just for their own twisted entertainment. Those that are taken alive have the worst end of all, as they will be given to Dark Eldars homunculi to be experimented on and twisted into monsters that will go in the arena or be used on battlefields. Or worse, being used to be tortured endlessly just so the Dark Eldars can stave off Slaanesh. Their pleasure and the pain they cause in excess being the only thing that keeps them alive, as Slaanesh will devour them otherwise. And usually, to twist even more the knife in the wound, they will keep you alive even when they are done torturing you, usually turning you into decorations of furniture to adorn their wretched halls, leaving you alive in agonizing pain for the rest of time. The Eldars are the main cause of the downfall of the galaxy into the Dark Ages it faces now, and even with the few decent factions that emerge from it, a few good apples don't cancel the birthing of one of the four, and a literal Satan with endless power. Now we come to the Tyranids, and this is probably the dumbest of arguments I ever saw for arguing that a species that literally devours planets is the good guys of a universe. The Tyranids are a galactic level threat. They are ever-adapting bioforms created only for one thing: consume everything in their path. They attack planets or entire star systems, slaughter all defenses on every planet, and then consume it to absorb all the biomass they can from it, leaving behind only a dead desert world, not a cell of life remaining on it. The hive fleets that create them and assault planets are connected by something that the Imperium calls the hive mind. It is an hyper-intelligent link that plans assault after assault of planets for the acquisition of ever more biomass, which in turn is used to create even more bioforms that are used to attack even more planets in a chain. The Tyranids will stop only when the entire galaxy is devoured and left as a lifeless husk of dead rocks. And this is where the entirety of the argument on them being the good guys crumbles. Because it is based on the fact that the Tyranids don't have secondary purpose other than devour everything, because it is all they know how to do. But that, once again, can be farther from the truth. The Tyranids' assaults are far from animalistic in nature. Maybe they are in the beginning, but we have seen more than once that the Tyranids, once they are connected to the hive mind, become a species with purpose. They will organize and fight on battlefields with tactics, as every army. Meaning that there is a bigger intelligence to organize their efforts, for the single purpose of killing and consuming every living organism it finds on its path. For example, in the Shield of Baal series, the Tyranids of Hive Fleet Leviathan are moving to attack Baal, the homeworld of the chapter of Space Marine known as the Blood Angels. In this series, at one point, the Necrons that were sleeping on one of the worlds wake up, and when they came out of their tomb, they found the world in a siege against the Tyranids, the Blood Angels fighting against them with what was left of the planetary population, and made a temporary alliance with the Blood Angels, as described even in the short story Words of the Silent King, just this time to fight together. The Necrons unleashed a weapon that hit the Hive Fleet and pretty much deleted a good chunk of it, stunning it and sending the Hive Mind in a confused state, before the Necrons and the Space Marines used the occasion to evacuate the planet. Mephiston, the Blood Angels' chief librarian, was capable of reading the emotions of the Hive Mind in that moment. It was angry. In fact, it was furious with what had just happened. This shows that the Tyranids have an higher intelligence and have higher emotions, and if you fuse with that the fact that they used to have an ambassador race in the Zoats, and the fact that they send Genestealer Patriarchs to infect the worlds they are going to attack, and create a Genestealer cult just to weaken it in preparation for their assault, and the fact that if they win, they will remove the mind control from the infected humans of the cult, just to have them fall in despair to what they had done before consuming them, you understand two things of the Tyranids. First, they are intelligent intelligent enough to choose to be hostile and kill everything in their path for their own purpose, and to become stronger. And secondly, that they relish in playing with their own auxiliaries just to see them desperate before they too succumb. Only sentient beings relish in desperation and in killing other living beings. It is a trait of higher intelligence that you can't really ignore. The Tyranids know what they are doing, and have chosen to be hostile. This means that they could have chosen otherwise. By definition, this makes them evil.
I mean, even if they weren't intelligent, who would side with spacefaring locusts that eat everything indiscriminately?
Then we have the Necrons, another species coming directly from the War in Heaven, known before they became the Necrons as the Necron-tier race. Another race created by the Old Ones, like the Eldars and the Orks. They were a sickly and weak race, born on a planet in inhospitable conditions. They had a very short life, and built their cities underground and fashioned like tombs. As it is what they will be in the long run. They begged the Old Ones to grant them respite from their situation, but to no avail. So when the Necron-tier found another very powerful race called the Catan, they made a deal with them. The Necrons were to help the Catans against their enemies, the Old Ones, and in exchange, the Catans would grant them eternal life. They were tricked into accepting. The Catans created bodies for the Necron-tier made of living metal, a very powerful substance that only the Necrons know how to fashion and use, and made a transference to move their souls from their bodies to the new living metal bodies. The Catans devoured the majority of the souls of the Necrons, and turned them into mindless slaves, with only the upper echelons of their society maintaining singularity and personalities, other than working brains. Necrons like the Silent King, Trazyn the Infinite, and Orican the Diviner, a few of the names that come to mind as for Necrons that maintained individuality. But as promised, the Necrons started the War in Heaven, the war against the Old Ones, their favorite species in the Eldar, and then the species created to fight them, the Orks. A war they pretty much won, with the Eldars going into hiding as they were mostly psychic-based warriors, and the Necrons are immune to psychic influence entirely, and the Orks left without their masters once the Catans and the Necrons killed the Old Ones in their entirety. One was rumored to have survived and to have become the Emperor of Mankind at a later date, but that is just a theory. It is then that the Necrons turned on the Catans, that shortly before turned against one another themselves. They moved war to the equivalent of their own gods, and even there, they won, thanks to their superior technologies and immortal ever-regenerating forms. They defeated the Catans, and enslaved them as sources of energy to use in their empire and war machine, managing to kill one of them, the Catan Landu Gor, also known as the Flayer. When it died, the Flayer transmitted a virus to the Necrons, creating the Flayer virus, where the Necrons that are infected yearn to be organic again. And to achieve that, they will slaughter and flay any living beings, wearing their bones and organs and covering themselves in their skins. At that point, the Silent King, the Supreme King of the Necrons, cut the connection he had with every Necron of the galaxy to avoid the virus spreading to the entire race. As the Necrons return to their tombs after what can be estimated as millions of years of war to rest, only recently waking up again in 40k and emerging from their tombs once again. Now the Necrons are divided in dynasties, but are the most advanced species left in the galaxy in terms of technology. Virtually immortal and with war machines that can annihilate multiple planets at once, like the World Engine, a war machine the size of a planet and that scoured various planets of life before the Imperium managed to stop it, with the chapter of the Astral Knights sacrificing themselves to turn off his shields, and have the engine bombed to pieces by an entire fleet. The Necrons, save a few, see organic life as an invasive species, parasites and intruders in a galaxy that is by right theirs, as one of the first species, and conquered in a war so big the Imperium could not even imagine it. The only reason the galaxy still has organic life and has not been scoured of all living things is that only a few Necrons have truly awakened, with their race awakening very slowly and a few dynasties truly emerging from their tombs. If their entire race awakens, the galaxy is doomed to become an empty husk, where the only things left living are made of metal.
Unleash the power of the Nephilim. Our worlds are infested. Scour them clean. This is my hour.
And last of the major players of the galaxy, even with how small their species is, we have the Tau race. The Taus are the youngest of all the species fighting for supremacy in the galaxy. It is a society divided in castes, and that originates by a planet the Imperium avoided applying exterminatus to because of external events. As they were sighted no more than 5,000 years ago using sticks and stones on their world of origin by an Imperial patrol, that was preparing to apply exterminatus to the planet before being called away for other major events. Their society was divided in 4 castes in the beginning: the Water, Fire, Air, and Earth caste. The castes were hostile to one another and hated each other. This was until a 5th caste emerged, the Ethereal caste. The Ethereals are the highest echelons of the Tau, seemingly being their commanders and being the ones that help them put to the side their differences and start working together. They created the ideology of the greater good, where everything the Tau race does is all in the name of an highest purpose of living all in harmony and together. And this is why people consider them the good guys. It is a shame that is just surface level reasoning when you look a bit deeper into the species, and especially the Ethereals. The first example of this are a species that was called the Poctrun. They were the first sentient race to join the Tau Empire in M37, when they started expanding and annexing more species to their greater good ideology. But strangely enough, within a few generations of joining the Tau, a strange disease destroyed the indigenous population of the verdant and lush planet they lived on. The Tau, which strangely enough were immune to the plague, inherited their own world, renaming it Borkan, and turning it into a prime world under direct Tau control. The Tau would expand and conquer more and more, annexing more and more races either through alliance, subterfuge, or open war, until they came into contact with the Imperium, violating its borders and not being able to identify themselves to the Imperial planet guarding space in that region. One of their ships was fired upon and destroyed, and this, from both sides, was a declaration of war. The real extent of how much evil the Ethereals are capable of came out thanks to one of their own commanders, Commander Farsight. Commander Farsight was the most skilled of the Tau generals and most powerful of their warriors. While fighting in a campaign against the Imperium, Farsight was the first to witness the warp and the entities dwelling inside. Thing that terrorized him and showed to him that the Ethereals were hiding things from the wider Tau race. And during the war against the Imperium, when he found out that his entire Ethereal force and commanders had been slaughtered in battle, he saw in first person the castes of the Tau starting to be hostile to each other once again. Almost as if the Ethereals were the only thing in the entire species keeping them amicable through partial mind control. It is at that point that Farsight turned his back to the Tau Empire at large, took his forces and whoever wanted to follow him, and left the Ethereals behind, founding the small empire today known as the Farsight Enclaves. There, Farsight abolished the caste system that kept Taus relegated to certain hierarchy and roles, and the Ethereals were made enemies of the Enclaves, to be killed on sight. It is why, to this day, for the Tau Empire, the territory of Farsight is forbidden space, and Farsight itself is being hunted by one of his former best friends and current commander of the Tau forces, Commander Shadowsun. And to conclude the show of hypocrisy of the Tau, we have the 4th Sphere expansion incident. The incident was pretty much an experiment, the first experiment the Tau made with warp drives to enter the warp, but they did it with a massive fleet and with no Geller fields. Their slipstream modules creating a giant wound in real space that devoured the fleet whole into the warp. And having human auxiliaries with them, this means that the moment they entered the warp, their ship was assailed by legions of demons and warp entities that seemed spawned from the humans they had with them. That incident is also where the Tau will see for the first time the warp entity known as the God of the Greater Good. Having seen that humans were the ones creating the warp entities with their mind, the Tau of the 4th Sphere expansion started slaughtering all of their auxiliaries of other species, until none were left. 3/4 of the fleet were destroyed, and only remnants of the ships managed to come back, helped by the entity dubbed the God of the Greater Good. The Ethereals had buried the incident and scrambled to contain all knowledge of the catastrophe, but when the 4th Sphere expansion Tau came back, they came back extremely changed in their ways. Now, the Taus of the 4th Sphere expansion have become extremely xenophobic, and are known to send their own auxiliaries of other species to death on purpose, or slaughtering them all themselves, to the point that all auxiliaries of other species had to be removed from the Tau left of the 4th Sphere. The Tau are no better than the Imperium. At least the Imperium and humans are open in their hate for anything different. The Tau come at you with a smile, ready to wipe you out if they find it more advantageous for themselves.
I had to sit through a PowerPoint on Tau for Heresy. It will haunt me for the rest of my life.
Now, even if we look at minor alien races, we can see that not really many of them are or were friendly. The Sloth, Megarachnids, and even the now extinct Rangdans are examples of that. But the biggest enemy humanity has is not an alien, but it is in fact an horror beyond comprehension, known only with the name of Chaos. To explain in detail what Chaos is, we have to return to the story of the Imperium for a second. After the birth of Slaanesh and the end of the Age of Strife, warp travel became once again possible in the galaxy. It is then that the Emperor arose on Terra. A Terra divided into warring factions of techno-barbarian warlords. The Emperor will start a series of conflicts known as the Unification Wars, where he will first use the genetically enhanced Thunder Warriors and then the transhuman super soldiers of the Space Marines to reunify Terra under his rule, and then move to annex and conquer the rest of the solar system. The Emperor would also create beings known as the Primarchs, pretty much partial clones of himself, created using his own DNA as a template, and demigod beings if compared to anything a human is. They will be the gene fathers to Space Marines, and the greatest generals the Imperium ever had. The Primarchs will be scattered around the galaxy by a warp rift that opened in the laboratory of the Emperor when they were still toddlers. And the Emperor had to declare the Great Crusade using the legions of Space Marines without them, to unify mankind under his rule, and re-establish human dominion in a galaxy that hated humans, and wanted them gone or enslaved. The Great Crusade will sweep the galaxy in search of the Primarchs, as the newly formed Imperium of Man became stronger and stronger, as the Space Marine legions conquered more and more planets, annexing human colonies either by alliance, or unfortunately at times by war, and liberating all human colonies it found under control of Xenos of any kind. In time, the Imperium of Man will control the majority of the galaxy, as 18 of the Primarchs were found and reunited with their legions. It was at this point, after the conquest of Ullanor and the fall of the biggest Orc empire ever seen by humanity, that the Emperor will cede command to his favorite son and most skilled general, Horus Lupercal, to retire on Terra to work on his secret projects in peace. It is here that Chaos will strike. The forces of Chaos managed to corrupt Horus by showing him a bleak vision of the future that depicted the dark ages of the Imperium. Horus became convinced that the Emperor had betrayed him and lied to all of his sons.
Together we banished the ignorance of old night. But you betrayed me. You betrayed us all. You stole power from the gods and lied to your sons. Mankind has only one chance to prosper. If you will not seize it, then I will!
Horus will corrupt and sway by subterfuge or betrayal 8 of his brothers and their legions to join him, and will start the civil war known as the Horus Heresy. A giant civil war that showed the full power of chaos and corruption on all that were on the side of Horus. This civil war will go on for almost a decade and cost trillions of lives, splitting the Imperium in half and throwing it in an apocalyptic war that will sign humanity forever in the millennia to come. The Loyalists in the end emerged victorious. Horus died by hand of the Emperor, but the Emperor will be wounded beyond healing, and will be entombed in the Golden Throne in a life support system, where he resides silent and in pain from millennia. The Loyalists, after winning, scoured the galaxy of all people loyal to Horus and the gods of chaos, pushing them back from the territories they held in the Imperium all the way into the Eye of Terror and the Warp, the domain of demons and the gods of chaos themselves. The Imperium at that point learned that the enemy was not only aliens, but renegades and chaos were the biggest of threats. Chaos influence is a power that can corrupt everything, technology, entire planets, and especially their populations. And it isn't something you must choose to do. Even just seeing a symbol of one of the Chaos Gods, or even learning their names, is enough over time to become corrupted, even without realizing it. And if Primarchs and Space Marines could fall to it, then nobody was truly safe from its influence. And by definition, nobody was to be trusted. The Imperium, thanks to those events, learned that gods existed, and hated every single one of them. And they learned that nobody could truly be trusted fully, as nobody was safe from the entities of the Warp. This is the reason the Inquisition was established. This is why entire planets are purged and every single sign of corruption is hunted down and dealt with before it becomes a bigger threat. Over time, all loyalist primarchs will disappear, and the management of the Imperium fell on the flawed humans. This is when the Dark Ages truly descended on the Imperium of Man, with many events like the Age of Apostasy signing its darkest moments. Now, this is a section I want to call the faults of the Imperium, because while the Imperium, as I have showed, are more like the victims of this galaxy, they are flawed in their own rights, but with good reason. The Imperium of Man itself under the Emperor was a contrarian to all kinds of religions, because the Emperor knew that worship was empowering the gods of chaos, and so acted accordingly, purging all that would not abandon their beliefs, as they were actively empowering the archenemy. It is in this that people find irony, as when the Horus Heresy ended, the Emperor himself became the god of the human race, worshipped in the Empire by all, and worshipping anything else being a crime punishable by death. Once again, as usually, belief in anything but the Emperor inevitably leads to the predations of chaos. The human fear of knowledge and technology came from the cybernetic revolt, where technology almost wiped us out. The human fear of the alien came from the Age of Strife, where humanity was battered into submission by various alien races, that would have wiped us out entirely if they had the means to do so. Unfortunately, this means that when the Imperium was established, even peaceful alien races were purged with extreme prejudice by the Emperor and the legions. It is a tragedy, yes, but can you really blame it on the human race at that point? Humanity was the first to extend their hands in peace to anything they didn't know. The alien, the psyker, and always they paid the price for the tolerance they showed. For the human race of the Great Crusade and Warhammer 40k at large, now tolerance is a privilege they can no longer afford, as the Emperor emerging was the last hope humanity had to reunite the human species under one single banner and avoid the extinction of all humans of the galaxy, especially if chaos had taken initiative. The Imperium of Man also didn't leave the colonies that wanted nothing to do with the Imperium alone, but in fact moved war to them and conquered them forcibly, pushing them into submission with the weight of the Space Marine legions and the slaughter of their armies. People point at the Interrex mainly as the principal example of this, but I want everyone to ask themselves something. Was leaving these colonies alone really an option? Think about it. If you can simply ask to be left alone, what reason there would be to accept being all under the same banner? If some empires or stars were simply left independent and free from the control of the Imperium, what would have stopped other planets asking the same? What would have pushed people to join the Imperium if they could simply answer no? Every single planet left unconquered was, to put it simply, a threat to the stability of the Imperium. By the simple fact they existed, they could inspire others to join them, and maybe they would even join forces with the free colonies to declare a rebellion against the Emperor, undermining the stability of the entire Empire that would divide into warring factions for independence and cause even more division. Leaving colonies alone was simply not an option when you are trying to build a giant empire that is moving war to everything to bring the galaxy under the control of humans once again. Tolerance had failed once, the Emperor was wary of it failing again. So, it simply became not an option any longer to have an open mind in any way possible. The main thing that now drives the Imperium is the survival of humanity at large, and nobody in the Imperium itself can be trusted. The discovery of chaos and the threat of betrayal and more civil wars after the Horus Heresy left humanity at large paranoid of anything outside of the status quo, rendering many of its members zealots that border on sociopaths that look for taint of any kind anywhere, from dissent to sympathy of the alien, to a mind corrupted by chaos. Rarely slaughters in the Imperium are unmotivated. If you watched my video on the Space Marine chapters that went against the Inquisition, you are aware that, for example, during the Months of Shame, both sides had a point. The Space Wolves wanted to avoid the slaughter of innocent soldiers and civilians just because they had seen chaos, but the Inquisition was well aware that the simple fact they knew of the archenemy would at one point corrupt them. It was the only way to avoid more threats, and this brought more civil wars when the factions clashed. The Imperium itself as a whole is morally grey. It is an empire built on the hate of everything different by the sheer fact that everything different is a threat to the survival of mankind. The Imperium has more than once committed atrocities in the name of human survival. Just look at the actions of Inquisitor Cryptman to slow down an Hive fleet, where he probably exterminated hundreds of billions of people in a system-wide exterminatus just because they could not defend them, and he wanted to starve the Hive fleet of more biomass of which to fight with. The Imperium is not even oppressive in the ways many other YouTubers present it as. Every planet under the Imperium itself is required to do two things, and two things alone. Ensure the worship of the Emperor, and pay its taxes in time. That is literally all the Imperium demands from planets. Because anything but worship of the Emperor causes chaos corruption. As in the universe of 40k, Satan is real, and there is in fact multiple of them, with the 4 chaos gods. All of them ready to annihilate all human life if given the chance. Helped by armies of traitor humans, chaos cultists, and chaos space marines. And the taxes paid are used to move war and protect other planets from the threat of the alien, the heretic, and the legions of demons from hell. But you know what irritates me the most? The people that call 40k in general, or even just the Imperium of Man, satire. Does 40k have satirical elements here and there? Yes, every work of fiction and art does. But is Warhammer 40,000 completely satire? Fuck no! And if Games Workshop and their slew of barely decent writers are trying to make the Imperium of Men appear like satire or something, they have failed miserably. And do you want to know why? Because I can show you when the death of satire happens, and it is very simple to see it. Satire dies when you manage to make what you want to satirize in behavior completely justified as behavior. We can see this especially when talking about morally grey factions of 40k and humanity, like the Inquisition. Even the Inquisition is separated in various ideologies on how things must be approached. There is an ideology in the Inquisition and a faction born from it, known as the monodominant faction. They are inquisitors that believe that only humans should walk the stars, and have devoted themselves to the complete extermination of all aliens of the galaxy, until only humanity is left. Now, this might seem a bit extreme even by the eyes of the Inquisition. It is why they are usually extremely Puritan inquisitors. But can you really call this ideology unjustified? Can you really call this faction satire? 99 out of 100 species of aliens encountered around the galaxy are hostile in one way or another. How are the inquisitors of this faction wrong in wanting all of them gone? Now obviously this raises questions in a morally grey territory. The entire Inquisition is morally grey at best in many situations. But does this count as satire? Once again, no, it doesn't. Because the ideology and the faction exist out of lived experiences, not superstition, not fanatism. Aliens are proved to be almost always hostile against us. Where is the satire in having inquisitors that want all of them gone? Where is the satire in a justified reaction to a reality of the universe of 40k? And this can be applied fully to 40k. How can the Imperium be satire when before becoming an empire that focuses on the survival of humanity and human supremacy of the stars, they were the only faction that openly offered peace to everyone and coexistence with everyone just to be betrayed and brought to the edge of extinction over and over? What should have humanity in 40k done? Rolled over and died? Was that a preferred outcome than reaching the breaking point and becoming openly hostile to your own enemies? At that point, you have to ask yourself a question. Are you really the bad guy of a situation if everything you have to do is done by sheer will to survive? Because from what I told you, you now, at least I hope, are seeing that humans were pushed into being like this by near extinction event after near extinction event. And if they have to be the only ones left standing to survive, even while looking at each other with mistrust because of chaos, can you really blame them? Can you really call somebody fighting for their right to exist for thousands of years evil? In my opinion, humans are the victims of 40k. Morally grey at best, but everything they do is done to survive. Because the alternative is extinction, nothing else.
The galaxy is for the humans, fuck the Xenos.
You want to reward that? Because by memes, Gilliman took fuck the Xenos to a whole new meaning. In fact, I prepared a PowerPoint I wanted to show you on it.
But up War Part 5. I win a round, finally.